Hello, welcome to today's webinar, Insurance Claims, a guide to the process for community workers and financial counsellors. My name, as some of you may know, is Loretta Creed. I am the Acting Assistant Director of Civil Justice Services and I practice in the Consumer, Farm and Rural and National Disability Insurance area. With me today I have Paul Holmes, Principal Lawyer in the Civil Justice Services at Legal Aid Queensland, who's an absolute guru on anything consumer. Before we start, we have to do some housekeeping. I'll quickly run through the housekeeping for you. This webinar will be recorded and displayed on our YouTube channel after the webinar. If you have any technical difficulties, please check out the GoToWebinar support webpage. The webinar will run for approximately 1 hour. Listen to that, Paul. That means we have 40 minutes for the presentation and then 20 minutes for questions at the end. We'll definitely have to hurry.
Although we're more than happy for you to insert questions as we go and we can answer them as you send them through.
Absolutely. On the right, so about the downloads, on the right-hand side of your screen, there's a sidebar. That is the control panel. You can download the handout using the control panel. You can also use the control panel to ask a question. They say leave your questions until the end, but both Paul and I are really happy to answer the questions throughout the webinar. Just sometimes we might have trouble seeing them.
Can we just check, can everybody hear us? Because we've just got a message or two suggesting that people can't hear. So echoed, so we're having trouble with the sound. So is everybody having trouble with the sound? Okay. So we will just see if we can fix that sound. So some of you have good sound, some are struggling. If you're struggling with the sound, can I get you to go to the GoToWebinar help page? And that will have some troubleshooting tips for you. We will also try and speak a bit louder.
Yes, Loretta will try and speak a bit louder. Now, we love it when you interact with us, which is why we've included some polls. Here, we want to find out a couple of things about you. So, Paul, over to you.
Okay, so our first poll, those of you who've been to our webinars before will be familiar with these polls, and we just find it's a good way of getting everybody involved. So the first poll, which I'm going to share, is which region do you work? And I've just launched that now. So if you want to jump in and respond to that, that would be great. Early, we're seeing a lot of people from outside Queensland, which is great. And a lot of people from Southeast Queensland. So I'll just give that a few more seconds for people to respond. All right, I will close that now. So I'll just share those results with you. So welcome to everybody that's not from Queensland. We hope you enjoy the webinar. Welcome to our usual attendees from Queensland. If you're attending our webinar for the first time, welcome. Now, one other poll before we go is around insurance and how regularly do you assist clients who might have an insurance claim or an insurance problem? I'm expecting a few of you to say very rarely, but I think there are opportunities for those of you who don't assist to provide some guidance for people who come and seek assistance from you.
I think you could be right, Paul.
And that's okay. And I think this is a really important thing to be across because unfortunately, more and more we're seeing Loretta natural disasters affecting pretty much every state in Australia. So it's important to be aware of those. All right, I'm going to shut that down now and just quickly share it with you. And that shows that not many of you have great experience with helping people with insurance claims. So hopefully during the course of this webinar, we'll give you some good tips that will allow you to give some good help to the clients and the people you deal with. All right, so let's dive into the meat of what we're going to talk about today. So what we're going to look at is just quickly look at a bit of what insurance is and how it works, what process we need to follow if something goes wrong, some tips on how we think community workers can assist clients with insurance, and then some wider stuff around what process should you do if an insurer decides to pursue you for somebody else's insurance claim.
And we get a lot of questions about that, and they're usually very tricky ones to answer.
Yeah, all right, so let's dive straight into it. The most common risks we see people trying to protect themselves against, I think it's fair to say, are natural disasters. So you're talking floods, unfortunately fires, as we saw a lot last year. Cyclones is a big one in Northern Australia and particularly in Queensland. Car accidents is a big one. Legal Aid gets enormous amounts of questions around car insurance, and I would expect that's the same around all the states. And then one where we're not going to spend a lot of time on, but illness through products like income protection.
And the other thing that we're not going to spend any time on, which is some insurances that are compulsory, like the insurance that you purchase when you register a car. Yeah. This presentation is not about that.
No, and that's because you're expected to have that by the government.
By law, and what it covers will be legislated for.
Yeah, so there should be no doubt. So what we find with clients, and we find this with lawyers, let alone clients, is insurance can be pretty confusing. You've got the big 60-page PDS, it's got all sorts of terms and conditions in it, and people go, oh my God, what do I do?
Yeah, oh, that would be fair to say. I do it too.
You do it too? So look, the way, when people come with questions about insurance, my starting point that I ask them is, what is it that you're trying to protect against? And if you're not sure your policy is protecting you against that risk, whatever it might be, you should ask questions of your insurer until you're satisfied. That's, after all, why their call centres are there. And if they can't answer that question, I'm not sure I'm taking the policy out.
I wouldn't be taking the policy out with that insurance company, that's for sure.
Because the reality is, if they're selling you a product, they should be able to explain to you what that product is, how it protects you, and how it works. And until you're satisfied, I wouldn't be asking those questions.
Before we move on, I just thought of one other insurance policy that we get a lot of questions on at the moment is travel insurance.
Absolutely.
And that shows you we started doing this presentation or putting this presentation together before COVID, or at least before we started getting those questions about that policy. But the principles behind what we're talking about today apply across the board.
Agree. Absolutely agree. And there is a lot of work being done by organisations like the ACCC, ourselves, Financial Rights Legal Centre in New South Wales, who run the Insurance Law Service, and AFCA, the Australian Financial Complaints Authority, around travel insurance issues.
Yes.
And if there's any questions, you should ask one of us what's going on, and we can talk you through the travel insurance issues separately to this.
Yes.
All right. So my big thing about insurance is if we can stop the problem before you have to make a claim, then that's a win for everybody.
Except who would have guessed COVID?
Who would have guessed COVID? Yeah.
When they were buying their travel insurance policies.
This is true.
Sorry, Paul.
This is true. And I noticed there's a question that's come through around lenders' mortgage insurance. And
I'll answer that question straight away. It's a misnomer.
Yeah.
So lenders' mortgage insurance should not be called that because it does not cover the borrower, it covers the lender. So really it's a fee that a borrower has to pay for the lender taking out an insurance policy, so that if the borrower doesn't pay, or the money is the amount of the loan is not covered by the sale of the property, they get paid. But that insurer then can still pursue the borrower for any shortfall in after the sale.
And when we talk about insurers pursuing you under insurance claims, we'll talk a little bit about lender's mortgage insurance.
Yes, of course.
All right, so my big thing is checking what your current insurance is. We saw bushfires in Queensland over the weekend. And to me, that's a sign that if you haven't checked your insurance policy recently, or your clients have, it's worth having a look to make sure if you're in a fire-prone area or a flood-prone area or cyclone, and making sure you're covered. And when we say covered, be wary of policies that are really cheap, because they might not cover you for everything.
That's exactly right. Or you may have to, some people do make decisions about whether they're going to buy the insurance cover with flood.
Yep.
But the reason why because it's so expensive, but the reason why it's so expensive is because the insurer has assessed that there's quite a significant risk that they could be paying out on that policy. So understand that if you decline insurance in those circumstances, there's a good chance you will be paying out or will having to cover the losses yourself.
So it looks like some people are still having sound issues. We're going in and out. If that's the case, please continue to let us know, and please continue to check on the GoToWebinar page for troubleshooting.
I might move a bit closer. Is it me or is it Paul or is it both of us?
I think it's probably both of us, but we'll continue to let us know. All right. So what happens if something goes wrong? And I think this is the really important one, because when something goes wrong, your clients are under stress, because it usually means they've been in a car accident, they've been on the receiving end of a bushfire, a flood, cyclone, they might have lost their house, and they're wondering what happens next. And they're often worried about where they're staying that night.
Yeah, so sometimes making an insurance claim is the last thing on their mind.
Absolutely.
Immediately. Yeah.
Immediately. And so one of the really hard things is knowing when's a good time to start to help people following these traumatic events.
Yes. Because do you think, I mean, often legal aid's called in to go along straight after a bushfire or a natural disaster to give people advice about making claims. Is that sometimes too early, do you think, Paul?
Look, I think it's a good thing we're there early. And the reason I think it's a good thing we're there early is people reach the point when they want to make a claim at different points in time. And so we want to be there for the people who are ready early. We want to be there for the people who are ready in a week or two. And we want to be there for those people. I've had clients over the years who 2 years later, they're ready to make the insurance claim.
Wow, 2 years.
Yep. And all of those points in time are okay. Obviously, the longer you leave it, the harder it is to help the insurer by providing the details about what's happened.
Yes, and that could jeopardise you being paid for the claim, depending on how long it is. So the advice that we always give is get it in as soon as possible.
Absolutely. And I think from talking to insurers, they have the same advice.
Yes, of course.
Because it makes it the more quickly you make the claim, the better your memory is of what happened.
Exactly.
And so that to me is the first port of call. Make an insurance claim. Things to watch out for when you're making an insurance claim is some people are too stressed, and we covered that already.
Yeah.
And the line I always use at events is 100% of people who don't put in a claim aren't successful.
That's very deep, Paul.
But when people are under stress,
yeah, exactly.
They don't think in those terms.
No.
And they're worried about what happens if I don't get a client, don't get paid, etc. But you can only worry about that after the claim happens. The other thing that will occasionally happen is people will ring their insurer, and somebody who's trying to be helpful in the call center will say, oh, look, I don't think you've got a claim, or they might have talked to the neighbour down the road who hasn't been paid. And so that people are reluctant to make a claim. Neighbours have absolutely no control over an insurer making a decision about an insurance claim. Nor does the local butcher, newsagent, whoever it might be. These people are not decision makers about a claim, and neither is an insurer's call centre. They're the call centre. The people that make decisions in insurers about claims are the people that look at it after the claim has been lodged by the call centre.
And in this particular case, you see step one again.
Absolutely.
If you don't make a claim, you're never going to get paid.
Absolutely.
So there's no loss to making a claim.
Absolutely not.
I really like the third point. What you've got there is about your version of events may be different to what the expert is saying.
Absolutely.
What happened in some of the flood cases, I think it was really important, the evidence of clients as to how the water came into their properties meant that they were paid because they could say it wasn't a flood in terms of the definition of flood.
Yeah.
So statements of clients can often be very
So
important.
the thing about expert reports is expert reports are done after the event.
Yes.
And they're done on things like the topography of the area, and they're done on past experience of that area. And the reality is that sometimes doesn't represent what actually happened on the day of an event.
Absolutely.
And you're right. We've seen a number of cases that we ran through AFCA, the Australian Financial Complaints Authority, where our clients won because they were able to show that their version of events about what happened was the version of events that AFCA accepted.
Was more reliable in a sense than what the expert could say, having not visited the premises and looking at it, months down the track.
Or even where the expert has visited the premises, it's still after the event.
Yeah.
And that in-person experience of what actually happened is really important and has weight.
Yes.
And I find clients don't necessarily understand that it has weight.
Yeah.
Obviously, you've got to be really sensitive in how you have that discussion and when you're having that discussion with people, because the last thing any of us want to do is re-traumatize people who are recovering from a traumatic event. But my advice around that is, following natural disasters, we find one of the things that stresses people enormously is having to retell their story to 9 or 10 different organisations. They often have to tell it to us, the insurer, various government departments, in making grants applications, and that makes it really hard. And so if you can help them get their story down early and in a nice, easy to replicate form, you might help them type it up. That will actually take stress away from people.
Yeah, sometimes I think I do like people's stories when they just ramble in a sense, but sometimes it is nice to have a summary so that it's more succinct and it's more easy to give to somebody and they go, oh yeah,
this is what happened.
And we can also see that this has merit or whatever. And then the other stuff is really important because it shows the person's lived experience. Yeah.
Absolutely agree.
Yeah, no.
And that lived experience is so important to part of the recovery.
Yes. So
no question about that. All right. So the other thing we want to talk about is what happens if they've made the claim, it's denied, and they've got a written refusal letter saying claim refused. If you ever get somebody that says my claim has been refused and I have not got a written refusal, that's when you help them call the insurer and say, put it in writing.
Absolutely.
Because that means the insurer is actually setting out why it is they say they don't have to pay the claim. And that's really important to the next step, because that allows us or the insurance law service or a community legal centre to have a look at it and go, either, yeah, look, the insurer might be right, but you can dispute it if you want, or we don't agree with the insurer. Here's what you need to do.
Yeah. Or here's the extra, usually it's, here's the extra evidence we think that you need to gather to show that your claim is legitimate and should be paid.
Yeah, and that leads nicely onto our next slide, Loretta.
Oh, good.
The complaint to an internal dispute resolution area needs to be more than, to be successful,
Yeah.
your decision is wrong.
Yes. It's not going to be very successful.
And this feeds back to what you were talking about earlier, Loretta. Often, what happens in between lodging the claim and lodging the IDR complaint is people have talked to their neighbours and gathered that extra evidence or more evidence about what happened.
Yeah.
And where that's happened, you absolutely give that to the insurer. Because that's an important part of them making a decision and something they do have to make a decision about.
And a lot of the times it's not just about, sometimes they do make the decision that they'll pay their claim, but the amount of the loss, that's where you can really collect a lot of evidence to say, well, the amount that you're willing to pay me for this is not my loss.
Yeah.
It's less than what I actually lost.
And one of the big problems I understand from the bushfires in New South Wales and Victoria is how to deal with debris.
Oh, right.
Because one of the government, I think it was the New South Wales government, said they'd help in cleaning the debris up. But there's people who have debris cover under their insurance that would entitle them to get paid. And as I understand it, there was some confusion about who was actually going to do the cleaning up. And so those sorts of issues will pop up. And where they pop up, let us know.
Yeah.
And we have those conversations with the Insurance Council all the time. And they're very good, in my experience, at being responsive following natural disasters when us and other community organisations raise these type of issues.
And so that's where there's a systemic issue.
Yeah.
You think, look, this is a systemic issue. I think we should raise this at the Insurance Council level, and they can then put in place some policies or speak to the insurance companies who may change their position or the way in which they deal with these complaints on a more wholesale.
Wholesale. Yes, that's the word I was looking for. Thank you. And over the years, my experience is insurers have got a lot better in how they deal with natural disasters and insurance claims. And it's partly due to the fact that they listen to feedback we give them and help. So, question coming through about making a claim if you're not insured.
Can
we park that
until the end of the presentation, because
we are coming to that.
Yeah, I'm dealing with that in detail.
So just hold that thought, and if we don't deal with your specific question, let us know and give us a reminder.
Yes, thank you.
All right, so the thing about an IDR process is not making a decision about whether you're covered is effectively can be viewed as a refusal. Yeah. So that shouldn't stop you from escalating it. And the other thing is, if you get a decision from the IDR process, you have 2 years, if you want to bring a complaint about a refusal to the Australian Financial Complaints Authority.
Yes.
Now, most of you, I suspect, have dealt with AFCA before in the context of banking and finance. They are equally as good in dealing with insurance issues, in my experience.
Absolutely.
Because over the years, we've probably run, it's probably in the thousands of cases that have ended up in AFCA about insurance and natural disasters. There are claims agents out there who inevitably pop up following a natural disaster, who will encourage people not to lodge with AFCA. And it's a problem I'm finding more and more. And the types of arguments they use are, you'll get a better result by continuing to negotiate with an insurer. Or the insurer will somehow take against you and treat you unfavorably in the future if you lodge a claim. or they don't believe that their story will carry weight against the expert reports. All of these are not true. AFCA is free, AFCA is independent, and AFCA has some of the foremost insurance experts in the country who work for them, and deal with these complaints on a daily basis. So if you ever get that sort of pushback about continuing to have the complaint with AFCA, please refer them for legal advice and please encourage them to continue with that claim. My only caveat to that is if they've got legal advice from somebody like us who said, no, you've got no case, then it's worth considering whether you continue with it. But the fact that we've said you have no case does not prevent those clients, if they want to, from testing their case with AFCA.
And this is why you want to go to AFCA.
Yep.
Because what these claims agents are really saying is you don't need AFCA, you could take this to court. And why wouldn't you want to go and do that?
Because court's expensive, Loretta. Really, really expensive.
Really, really expensive. I always tell clients, you know, when they're coming to me for advice and they go, if you were paying for this as a private lawyer, just imagine how much this conversation would have cost you.
Yep.
And I think it really does, it's a huge issue that this is free for consumers. And even if you're not successful, you don't have to pay for the legal costs of the insurance company. Whereas if you're out there and take legal action in court, you not only have to pay for your own legal costs, but the other side's legal costs if you don't succeed.
Yeah, and I think that's the really important part of this. That
yes.
Not only do you not have to pay costs, you don't lose anything by running a case through AFCA.
And at the end of the day, even if they make a determination and you don't like it, you could still go to court.
The reality is, we find though, most people following a natural disaster can't actually afford court.
No. And the reality is too that if you're not successful in AFCA, the chances of you being successful in a court setting
are not high.
Are remote.
Yeah, agreed. All right. The other thing we wanted to quickly cover is around settling an insurance claim, because the big issues that come up are around what happens if there's further damage that I find after the event. People get tired of dealing with the claims process because it's stressful, and scope of works. So we just want to quickly talk about that. I noticed there's a duty of disclosure question in there. That's something I'm happy to deal with again, because duty of disclosure is actually something the insurers and ourselves are working towards making easier for consumers. And there is law reform around changing the duty of disclosure, which is not yet passed by Parliament.
I always say you really need to tell them everything.
Yeah, that's a good rule of thumb.
Yeah.
But we're looking at adjusting, there's legislation looking at adjusting the law to mean inadvertent admissions would not count against people as much. And I think that's, if and when that's passed, that would be a good change.
Yeah.
All right. Whoops. I'm just having a moment with the technology. So the thing about further damage after the event, quick advice on that is go and tell the insurer.
Yeah.
Because it's often not until you start cleaning stuff up and the builder starts rebuilding stuff that problems become apparent. And when they become apparent, they're problems from the event. Tell them.
Yeah, of course. You have to tell them. Yeah, and you can. Yeah. But you're saying you can actually make the claim, even if you've already made a claim and you've said this is all my damages, and then the builder's building, and you find more damage. Yeah,
that doesn't prevent you from making a claim.
Does that also is that also the case if you've accepted money?
Absolutely, that's the case if you've accepted money. And there's actually provisions, from memory, it's in the insurance code, around if you've settled a claim within a month of the disaster, you've got 12 months to tell them of further claims and go back if you find further damage.
Which is a really good thing.
Absolutely.
I think most people would have realised that.
So that one's really important. The other one we want to quickly cover is around cash settlements.
Yes.
I find these cause enormous drama for people.
Mm.
Because people get sick of the rebuilding process. They get sick of dealing with the insurer because they're dealing with the insurer and 10 other people, and they want some control over rebuilding the house themselves.
Yes.
Which is fair enough. But cash settlements also have their downsides.
What are those downsides, Paul?
Look, the big one for me is if you take a cash settlement and repair your house, the insurer doesn't have to guarantee those repairs.
Yeah, so you've got a dodgy builder, you're stuck with the dodgy builder. You can take action against the dodgy builder, but you won't have, and this is one of the big things, you won't have the benefit, one, of the insurance complaints process, and you won't have the benefit of being able to go to AFCA, which we said is free for consumers. If you had a dodgy builder building it, you'd have to go to the court system. So that's why you really don't want to do it.
Absolutely. And the other thing around cash settlements is, and this is something AFCA's done a lot of determinations on, if you're accepting a cash settlement, it needs to be for the market rate.
Yes.
Not for the rate that the insurer could get it done.
Yes.
Because insurers, because they have so much work, can get better rates from builders.
Yes.
Because of the volume. An individual negotiating from a builder can't.
No.
And so that's a really important part of that, making sure it's actually going to allow you to rebuild.
And yeah, that's been a big problem for a lot of people, that they're not unhappy with the amount then that the insurer is willing to cash settle. What should they do in that circumstance?
That's why AFCA's there.
Yeah. Good.
Cash settlement, you don't like the amount, that's why AFCA's there. And that also feeds into the scope of works idea. If the scope of works the insurer gives you doesn't cover all the damage you've found, go back to the insurer and say it doesn't include all the damage.
Yes.
And if they won't change it, then that's why AFCA's there, to make a decision around whether the insurer is right about what needs to be done or whether you are. And if you reach, and this is the other thing, if you reach an impasse with the insurer, that's the very reason to go to AFCA. My experience is when you reach an impasse, continuing to talk about it for 6 months never solves the impasse.
No, it never solves it. Now, there's a question about the hardship provisions of the insurance code, and also about whether you should pay a landlord's excess as a tenant, so they can make a claim. I might just park that again for my slides.
Let's deal with that quickly now.
If you wanted to, because my only concern about paying a landlord's excess is that you're actually admitting that you're liable.
Yep.
And the other thing is that the landlord, if they get paid, they subrogate their rights of taking action against the tenant to the insurer. So not only would they be paying the excess, but they'd also then be paying the claim. So it's not necessarily a good thing to be paying a landlord's excess.
Yep.
When,
absolutely,
for those reasons.
And so the hardship provisions of the code play into that when you're negotiating to pay off that claim.
Yes.
And we're coming to that.
Yes, and yeah, so we'll come to that just as part of that
other discussion. All right, so just the takeaway tips, which I'll leave you to read in your own time, but they are encouraging people to check their insurance, encouraging people to lodge the claim, and assisting people with their story and recording it, which I think are really great things that community workers can assist with. The other one that comes to mind is people really struggle applying for grants following natural disasters, and they often need help with the forms.
Yes.
And helping people with the forms is, I think, a really undervalued part of what we all do.
Except generally we wouldn't be helping them.
No.
So because, and that's why it's really important that people do have that assistance, because they find forms just so challenging.
Absolutely. All right, so moving to this discussion we wanted to have around the insurer pursuing people for somebody else's claim.
So these would be the two most common things that come to us, is where where the consumer is responsible for a car accident, or where the consumer is a renter and the landlord says that they've damaged the property. In those circumstances, our clients are usually uninsured. That's why they've come to us, because the insurer is pursuing them. And so in our scenario, what usually happens, there's two different scenarios. One where the consumer says, yeah, I'm responsible for this. I caused the accident, but I can't afford to pay, or I have a dispute about how much they're claiming. The second circumstance is where the consumer doesn't agree they're responsible for the loss.
So what do we say there, Loretta?
Well, they should get legal advice.
When in doubt?
Get legal advice. Read legal aid. This because you can really stuff it up by writing back to the insurance company, paying for an excess.
Yep.
Because you think that way you won't have any more trouble with your landlord, and you could end up paying a whole lot of money. Or sometimes in car insurance claims, same thing. The other party said, just pay for my excess.
Yep.
I heard this once with a car accident, just where the car rolled down the hill, because children were in the car, and the neighbour said, just pay for the excess and that's it. And of course, the person paid for the excess, and then the insurance company pursued them for thousands and thousands of dollars.
And the other thing that feeds into that, Loretta, is you don't necessarily believe the insurance letter that you get sent saying, we have decided your negligence for this and you owe us this amount of money.
So this is the thing that most people don't realise. Just because you may have caused the damage, or something that you own has caused the damage, you only are responsible for that damage if you're negligent. So, and if they are negligent, and they can pay the debt, they should pay it in full. So whether you're negligent is determined by 4 factors: whether you have a duty of care, whether you've breached that duty, the breach caused the damage, and the insured suffered a loss as a result of the damage. So one of the recent cases that I had was somebody who parked their car, put their handbrake on, and the car rolled down the hill and hit another car. And the owner of the car that was damaged would have to prove that it was the negligence of the owner of the vehicle that caused the loss. So if you put your handbrake on and you put your whatever and you turned your car off and had it in gear, and there was and you had your car regularly serviced, and there was something that made that car lose the brakes or whatever, and it rolled down the hill, then you wouldn't be seen as being negligent, and therefore the insurer shouldn't be.
And you got a good result in that case from memory.
Not that one. It was another one, but the one where children are involved. This is often where children are involved. It's not if the parents keep an eye on them, done everything, and it just happens to be an accident. It doesn't mean that there was negligence on the part of the owner of that vehicle.
And the classic one in the rental space, and I know we've got people who deal with tenants online watching us, is just like the classic is something will catch fire.
Yes.
And just because something's caught fire, the insurer goes, well, you're liable to pay.
Yes.
And that's not necessarily true.
However, if you leave a candle burning and it catches fire, and it's established that it was the candle that caused the fire, then there is a good argument that you were negligent.
And that's the difference, and it's worth exploring those issues. The other important one, though, is what if you are liable and can't pay?
Then you have the financial hardship provisions of the insurance code practice. And Paul, I thought there was a new one.
And there's a 2020 code. We did a lot of work on it, but due to COVID-related reasons, the requirements for when the insurers have to start complying with that code have been delayed. So from 1 July, all insurers have to have a domestic and family violence policy on their internet page, and they also have to start complying with the spirit of the provisions around financial hardship and vulnerability. And those things, I think, apply equally to a natural disaster, car accident, whatever. And so insurers are starting to comply with those, but they don't have to technically fully comply with them until 1 January next year. And then the rest of the code in 1 July 2021.
And the good thing about the financial hardship provisions means that we think that there's an argument that it can include waiver of debt, where people are, where they can establish that
it will be considered.
Yes.
Under the new code, it's certainly something I'm expecting insurers to consider.
And now there's been a couple questions, and I'm going to try. When would they not be covered?
The question around late to pay insurance premiums is a really good one, Loretta.
Yes.
Because there's actually specific requirements in the Insurance Contracts Act about what an insurer has to do to let people know that they haven't paid and that the insurance is being terminated.
And if they haven't done that, the fact that they may not have paid their premium does not preclude
they still might have a claim.
Yes.
But if they have got that sort of notice, then it's going to be much harder to argue they can still make a claim.
I think it might be nearly impossible.
Nearly impossible, I'm happy to go with.
And what was the other question? What about there is no cover for the vehicle for the service centre and the test drive if the customer is not insured. I'm not quite sure I understand that question.
So I would say when you're putting a car in for a service, let's just say your car insurance doesn't cover you for when the car has been repaired. Let's hypothetically say that. There is still a claim against the insurance that service centre should have.
Yes.
Because they have obligations to complete stuff.
Well, there's a claim against the service centre. They might be able to access their insurance policy, but certainly there's a claim against.
And it may be that rather than making an insurance claim, you take the service centre to your local tribunal.
Yes, if that's the case.
Sorry, just long question. So we've got somebody living in housing, they've punched a hole in the wall. And who should pay for the repairs when the person is suffering from a fairly serious health condition? That's going to be very factual dependent, isn't it?
And I don't know if it's an insurance question.
No, that one's probably not an insurance question, but that's one we're both happy to chat to you afterwards about that one.
Yes.
The thing though is about we should talk about, Loretta, is about uninsured third parties.
Yes, so we're going to keep going. We might go back and skip past the Uber or rideshare driver.
Yep.
And then because that's about disclosure.
Yep.
Oh, do we want to go briefly into disclosure now, or do we want to?
Let's deal with this first and then go back to disclosure, I think.
So if they don't agree that they owe the money, just let me get my slides up. So AFCA in those circumstances have limited, if any, jurisdiction to address these complaints. So AFCA can consider complaints from uninsured third parties. That is, if the person whose stuff, if an insurance company pursues you for a claim and you don't think you're responsible, or you've had damage to your own vehicle, you can make a complaint first to the IDR of that insurance company, and then if they don't agree, to AFCA.
Yep.
However, there's a limitation on that. And the limitation on that is really that it has to relate to a car can't relate them for,
So you can't use it for landlords?
can't use it for landlords. The jurisdiction is limited to an amount of $15,000.
Yep.
And you really can't use it if you say that if you're not claiming for your own damage to the car. So if you're simply saying you don't agree with the amount that they're claiming,
yep.
so to speak.
And so if it's not within AFCA's jurisdiction, and this goes back to that earlier question, you end up in the tribunal having to dispute it, don't you?
However, I also think that sometimes you can use the insurance code of practice.
Yep.
And the way that I've used it in the past is that both in terms of financial hardship, so if they won't
talk about repayment arrangements,
it might be a breach of the code.
Yep.
Or because clause 13.3, now I'm not sure if that's the new code or the old code, says that the insurer will ensure that the amount we are seeking to recover from you is fair and reasonable.
Yeah.
Now, my argument in relation to that is that alleging liability, so in the case where I talked about the child being in the car and releasing the handbrakes, and the insurer just saying you're liable, was that fair and reasonable?
And I would say no.
Because what I've then gone on to say, because they've not established or provided any information as to why the uninsured was negligent.
Yep. I think that's a good argument. Right?
And so I think it could be a reason for arguing that they've not met their obligations under this clause. So what do you do then? Well, you can go and make a complaint to the Code Compliance Committee. Now, generally say, we think that the insurance company has breached the code. Now, they don't have any ability to direct the insurance company to fix the individual complaint.
No, they don't.
But
one of the great things under the new code is the Code Compliance Monitoring Committee has sanction powers. And if the systemic issue or the failure to comply with the code is great enough when it comes in, they can actually potentially fine the insurance company.
Yes, and also just by bringing it to the Code Compliance Committee's attention and them speaking to the insurance company about it often makes the insurance company turn their mind to whether they have breached the code. And we've often got outcomes in that particular way, but it's tricky.
I agree.
Very tricky. All right. Was there any other questions that?
So a good question come through. If an insurer is requesting payment for third-party damage, should it be detailed or a brief email? Yes, it should be detailed.
I agree. They should also provide the estimate of the damages.
Yep.
And also say why they think the client's liable. Not just have a blanket statement. We have information to say that your client, you are responsible for this accident.
Yeah, that doesn't cut it. Totally
now,
agree.
We're going to go back a little bit and just look at that ride share.
Which I think is really important.
And it looks at the issue of disclosure. So let's just head back to that. Let me see if I can find it in my notes.
The previous slide there, Anna.
Yes, I know. So this is all about disclosure.
Yep.
And when the person's become an Uber or rideshare driver.
Yep.
So if they've come one and then go and get a policy of insurance, or if they start ride sharing arrangements during the period of insurance.
Because technically speaking, you need a different type of cover if you're using your car
for commercial
purposes.
Yes. And what AFCA said, because there's a lot of people now that this has been coming up, the sort of things, it's really useful to go and have a look at that publication. It was really easy to understand too. Because like Paul was just saying, that you have a duty of disclosure, you have to act in utmost good faith. So when we talked about those criminal convictions, even if you were never generally asked a question, you have a responsibility to tell the insurance company anything that might influence their decision about whether or not to grant you insurance.
Totally agree.
So with these Uber or rideshare drivers, they look at was the person actually providing a rideshare service at the time of the accident? Because that's a completely different, like if the insurance company rings me and you're talking about your claim and saying, oh yeah, I went down the shop and picked up a bottle of milk, and they say, oh, do you do any rideshare? And you go, yeah, but I wasn't ride sharing at the time, then that would have been a claim that would have been payable anyway. You weren't engaging in a commercial.
Because we have seen insurers try to deny a claim where people have stopped driving Uber, but hadn't told the insurer that they were driving Uber.
I had a case years and years ago where an L-plate driver was driving the car, shouldn't, with no one next to him, but they were stopped at a stop sign and somebody ran into them and they said, well, you weren't complying with the law to have somebody with you. But it was irrelevant to the claim because certainly that had nothing to do with the claim. And I think in that case they weren't paid. If not, so if they weren't, they will also look at, did the insured have actual knowledge that they needed to tell the insurance company about being a rideshare driver? And if not, if they didn't have actual knowledge, how clear were the written statements of the insurance company that said you needed to tell them about it? So they're the sort of factors that you need, that they would take into case. But in my view, you should always tell.
You were on the side of telling more rather than
less.
All right. So Loretta, we've had some other questions coming through. One goes back to the idea of cash settlements that I wanted to quickly deal with.
Yeah, let's go and let's go through the questions as they popped up. I might put on my glasses to see if I can see them now.
And what happens is around cash settlements, you get paid a cash settlement and you've got a mortgage.
Yes. And
that happens a lot. And what people generally don't understand is there's a clause in your mortgage, more often than not, that says if you get an insurance payout, it needs to go to the person that holds your mortgage, so the bank. And invariably, they still allow you to fix your house and work on your house, but they're the ones that we've seen people not understanding that they have control over approving the works and getting it and allowing you to rebuild your house because they have an interest in the property.
But they can sometimes refuse
to allow you to rebuild. Yeah.
And they might do that if they're actually worried about people's ability to keep paying.
Yeah, they could. And so that's a really important thing to be aware of following a natural disaster.
Yeah, because you don't want to pay.
And might be a reason not to accept the cash settlement.
I remember speaking to somebody like that who'd had a cash settlement and the whole amount went to the bank and the bank refused to allow them to rebuild. So they had a vacant block of land that still had debris on it, I think, that had then paid out the mortgage.
Yeah.
But they could do nothing with the property.
And there's a question, they just want us to repeat the test for negligence, Loretta.
So the test for negligence is was there a duty of care? So yes, if you have a car and you own a car, well, you've got a duty of care to maintain it, to make sure your handbrake's on.
And to your fellow road users.
Yes. Did you breach that duty? So did you forget to didn't you put the handbrake on?
Did you breach the road rules?
And I'll tell you that once happened to me where I forgot to put the handbrake on.
And it's easy to do, but it's something that would make an insurance claim much harder.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it'd be hard. Well, you could say you're negligent.
Yeah, absolutely.
The breach of that duty caused the damage.
So the classic was your example before, the learner driver being hit in the back of the car.
Yeah. Yes, something like that. And the insured suffered loss as a result of that damage. And this often, I mean, in car accidents, it's pretty clear, but often I do have to talk to people when we're talking about this sort of stuff about what causation means. So,
and that's a very technical legal
Yeah.
question that if you
You
get
need-
community
you need
workers
legal
get
advice.
questions about, that's legal advice.
yeah, just get legal advice. If the client says, I don't think I was responsible, then they really ought to be getting legal advice, because we can look to see what their obligations might have been.
Now, there's another good question here around what if volunteers are driving your car? Do you need to disclose that?
To you, to the
Your insurer. Absolutely.
I think so, yes.
At the very least, you'd want them to be one of the drivers of your car on the insurance policy.
Yes. Well, you'd need to say, I think you'd need to say the insurance company.
I think so too.
Yes.
So answer is yes. Even if you're doing it for free, if you've got different people driving your car,
Yes.
tell them.
Yes. Absolutely.
When in doubt, tell them. Now, if there's any other questions, I notice we're nearing the end of our session. So if there's...
Oh, we're actually on time, Paul.
So if there, please feel free to shoot any other questions coming through. The thing about driving, so we've got a comment coming through about driving with wrong tyres or bald tyres can lead to an insurance claim refusal. Absolutely. It can, but not in all circumstances.
I wouldn't, yeah. Look, the sort of things that you usually get insurance claims refused for are things like, the typical one is driving under the influence.
Yep.
So if you are doing something illegal, then you're not going to be covered by your insurance policy. I did speak, but again, the insurance company actually has to prove that you were driving under the influence. So a suspicion of it is not going to be enough.
Absolutely. And usually if you've been charged and convicted, that will be enough.
Yes. So one of the things that often I have people coming to me and saying, I wasn't responsible for this accident. And I go, okay. You know, the police fined me and I paid the fine. And I said, well,
you've admitted liability.
You've admitted, yeah. And the standard of proof for a police fine is much higher than the standard of proof required to show that you were responsible for an accident in the civil sphere.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah, okay. Without prejudice. Loretta, do you want to talk about that?
Without prejudice basically means that what you've put in the letter can't be used against your client in later legal action. So particularly if you're saying to the insurance company, look, I'm willing to pay $500 for this accident, and instead of the $5,000 that they're claiming, you do it on a without prejudice basis, because if the insurance company refuses, then later on they can't say, look, this person admitted that they were liable for this accident by offering them the $500.
Yeah.
That's why you would put without prejudice. But again, I would always be asking for advice as to when to use it, because sometimes you may want to have an open letter because you can argue that the insurance company was being unreasonable.
Yep.
If it's an open letter.
Now, just probably got time for one or two final questions. Just to go back to this idea of the service centre that we talked about before. If the service centre has your car and damage has been caused and they're not agreeing to fix it, that's a legal advice question, and you should absolutely get the client legal advice if it's not been honoured. And go to your local legal aid or your local community legal centre.
Yes.
On that one. Now, can a third party at fault uninsured person be chased for the balance of a written off payment and other car? So I think we're talking about here, if they're getting a new car under the policy, can the person be chased for it if the damage is such that the car's a write-off?
Okay, so you can only be chased for the amount that you would have been liable for. What I'm saying, I know what you're saying. I think the point that you're making is the person might have had a policy that allowed them to get new for old replacement.
Yep.
You are only liable for the loss that you cause, which would be the market value of that car. You're not liable for something that they've got an extra benefit that they've got under the insurance policy. You're only liable for, you're in fact only liable for the loss that you cause. But I would get legal advice about that. And again, I think if the insurance company is making a claim for that, that in my view would be a breach of their insurance code, because they're not acting, they're not being fair and reasonable in pursuing a claim like that.
Okay, I think that's right. So,
All right.
Loretta, I think we're at the end of today.
Yeah.
So,
Sorry.
if the thing I'd say, if other questions pop in, and just as we're talking one has, can liability extend to make safe in a damage claim? I would say yes. There's an obligation insurers have if there's damage to a property to make it safe.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Now, can we just quickly go through the wrap up?
Yeah.
So
our contact details are on that slide.
Yes. We have 14 different offices across Queensland. You can stay up to date with our webinar program. Please check out our webinars, Paul and I. We always like to get more clicks.
And when we end the webinar, there will be a questionnaire for you to fill out.
Yeah.
Feel free to, as part of answering that, to tell us the sorts of subjects you want future webinars on.
And also to give Paul and I feedback. It's really important. I like to improve. We both like to improve the way that we do our presentations. We do try and make them chatty and interesting. It may not suit everybody, but just
let us know.
Yeah, candid feedback is always welcome.
All right. So, and the other thing is, if questions come to mind afterwards, shoot us an email and we can look at answering them for you.
Or maybe do another webinar.
Absolutely.
And in fact, if you've got any ideas for webinars that you would like, or questions that you would like answered and you think would be useful for others, include those.
All right. So I think that's us at an end, Loretta.
Yes, I think so too. Thank you so much, everybody. We'll see you the next time we do another one of these webinars.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.